Hi, everyone, and welcome to Books at Baker, the studio session. My name is Deb Wallace, and I'm the Executive Director of Knowledge and Library Services here at Harvard Business School. And since we started the Books at Baker series about 4 years ago now in an Aldrich classroom, and then we transitioned online just about a year ago in March 2020, we have had an increased demand, interest in people hearing more about our faculty's research. So we've introduced this new recorded session, sort of like Clapton's Unplugged, just something a little different, with conversations with our faculty about their new books. And I'm just delighted today to welcome David Fubini to this recorded session. So David, if you want to join us. There you are. Great. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Deb.
It is no surprise that David raised his hand right away and said, yes, I'd love to do one of these new sessions with you, Deb, given his track record in innovation, both here at HBS and at McKinsey. David, again, I can't thank you enough for helping us with this new series. David is a senior lecturer here at HBS in the Organizational Behavior Unit. He co-leads the leading professional services firms and mergers and acquisitions programs in our executive education group. And he's a bit unusual. He teaches 5, and I understand almost it's going to now be 6 of the required courses in the MBA. That's a very unusual approach, and I think you're going to see why. He's led the required course on organizational behavior, strategy, leadership and corporate accountability. He's also launched several new MBA courses for our second year, the elective curriculum, one on execution and planning, leadership execution and planning, and is planning a new EC course next year to be called Mastering Consulting Skills. I'm sure you don't know anything about that. That's such an unusual course for you. But actually, you know, David's expertise is based on over 30 years of experience in consulting at McKinsey, much as a senior partner. He was the managing director of the Boston office. He's been the past lead of the North American organization, and he's a founder of many of the firm's programs, one, the firm's worldwide merger management practice. And this book is literally based on thousands of conversations and observations that he's had with leaders of all types. So an incredible background, David, that you bring to this conversation. So thanks again. What I'd like to start with is Michael Blanding in his Working Knowledge article points out that this is really a guide for navigating the CEOs or the senior C-suite positions. And he said that the CEO position itself is unlike any other position. Therefore, this book is incredibly unique. So could you tell us a little bit about what's so unique about being a CEO? I mean, there are countless of them. And why is this book so important to this unique?
Well, it's a unique role in that you're in a unique position because it's unlike anything you've done prior to getting that assignment. Because and the thing that is so powerful about being a leader, and thus the reason for the book, is because you do all this incredible effort to become greatly skilled at both a function and an industry and a relationship management of a team that allows you to eventually get to ask to be the leader of the entire organization. And when you arrive, you think, oh, great, I'll just apply all those lessons learned that I had developed along the way. And you find out few, if any of them, are of any value in now your new role. It's a whole new set of activities that you have to undertake and be prepared for. And many don't know that and are ill prepared for it. So that's really the underlying reason for the book. It was really trying to also provide a bit of a peek behind the curtain, if you will, because it's rare that you actually see what a day-to-day or week-to-week life is of a leader of a large number of people, or even a small number of people, and how challenging that can be. And so I really wanted to provide a very practical guide with some real observations and some suggestions for how to address them, because it's good to not only point out the challenge, but also to give some thoughts about how to address them. So that was really what my objective was. This is not the big lofty book of a CEO talking about their philosophy of life and history. Because one, I've never been a CEO. Let's be clear about this. And also, it's because I'm a pretty practical, down-to-earth, consultative sort of personality, and that probably shows in the book.
Well, speaking of that, let's start with you, because even though you said you haven't been a CEO, you have certainly been in very, very senior management roles. And so I'm wondering, how much of this do you see yourself in this book too? Could you have chronicled in each of the 15 chapters something that was from your own experience, either while you were at McKinsey or since you've been at HBS?
Oh, without a doubt, there's a lot of personal in anytime you write something, it's going to be personal, but also in this case, it certainly is, because there's lots of discussion about challenges and failures, and no doubt I've had challenges and I've had failures. And so indeed, some of that is in the book. Some of the advice I give to others is advice I have received over the years myself. And, for example, just switching from 34 years in management consultancy to then come to Harvard and to be joining the faculty, I needed to find my own set of mentors and my own, guides to help me, because it is such a unique experience to be in front of students in a Socratic-based way, either in the classroom or then again online. And so therein lies a great part of the book, is talking about the power of mentorship and mindsets. And that certainly, had to be important for me. Coming to Harvard was a new mindset to be of service to students rather than clients, and obviously new mentors for me.
Yeah. Well, you identify 3 audiences for this book. Obviously, the CEO, especially new CEOs and others, senior leaders in that C-suite. And then for the people, talk about looking behind the curtain, for the people who are working with the, understanding the managing up, kind of how do you get insights into what this position is like. And then for aspiring leaders, which you've certainly hit with coming to HBS and working with our MBAs and our executive education. Do you see people working differently with the book? Would they interpret the lessons learned? Obviously, their experience is different, or their challenges are different. So in other words, how, now that you're teaching as well, what's the best way to learn from lessons learned? Like, how is someone's hindsight important?
Well, I think being able to look at people that you have come to know and worked with, or in your past, or that you are experiencing even in the moment, to understand what is the underlying challenges and personal affects that they are feeling as a leader is really powerful, because then you can be much more understanding of and be relating to what how they're acting, why they're acting the way they are, and how they choose to take the steps forward that they do. So I think it's really important to just put yourselves in the shoes of and the actual experiences of those who are going to be leading you, or you hope to emulate. So that's the power, I think, also of the book and these different audiences. Existing CEOs who I've asked to read the book prior to its publication, and now I've shared it with a number of them afterwards. I mean, best illustrated by actually one of a colleague here at Harvard who's a former CEO, who said, "David, I knew you'd be practical and truthful. I just didn't realize you're going to be that practical and that truthful." I mean, he said, it's a little blunt, and that's terrific, because, we need to hear that. And so that was interesting to hear from them. Other business unit leaders benefit because they can actually understand how to try to change their own skill sets as they seek to be leaders. And obviously our students can learn, because there's some life lessons in here for all of us, as I've just illustrated, even for myself. Yeah.
Well, I ran across a quote by Confucius talking about gaining wisdom. And he said that, or it's attributed to him having said, is that we learn wisdom by 3 methods. The first is by reflection, which is the noblest. The second is by imitation, which is the easiest. And the third by experience, which is the bitterest. So I think, you've combined all three of these modes in one handy, as you said, handy and practical guide. Would you agree that that this is how we gain wisdom? And of these three, do you see a combination happening in the stories that you tell, or what's your observation? Tell us a little bit about how people learn.
Well, I think people do learn by trial, reflection, and then a sense of learning, and then a repeat.
Yeah.
The challenge for most is the reflective part. We are not very good just in terms of our desire to go forward, to stop and be reflective. I had, when I just talk about learning from your students, I had an former Israeli fighter pilot in one of my sections, and he described how if any time they climb in an airplane and fly it, even if it is just around the airfield and land it again, they have an after action review.
Right.
And he said, that's something we should do more, as he was saying, as a student. And I said, absolutely. Actually, in life, we should all do more. We should all learn from that experience, because the after action review process is one that is rarely done well.
Yeah.
And that's key to learning. And certainly I saw that even in my colleagues at my former role as a consultant. I certainly saw it in trying to get leaders to step back and say what worked, what didn't work there.
Right. Yeah, taking the time. We did another Books at Baker session with Joe Badaracco,
Right.
and he was talking about that moment in time reflection, is that we don't always have to go through a whole big review process, or an after action is a very planned process, but that we can stop and think about and reflect, and it was incredibly powerful. So nothing like cross-selling our Books at Baker.
Oh, well, absolutely. Well, we should all listen to Joe, who has enormous experience. And speaking of mentors, when I came on board, Joe reached out to me and had me teach the course that he was a course ed for many, many years, called Leadership and Corporate Accountability. And it's been just a joy to try and learn from him, who is remarkably gifted in the classroom.
Yeah. Well, all 15 chapters have incredible nuggets of wisdom and things that we could take away from them. And if we had, endless time, I would love to just go chapter by chapter, but unfortunately we don't have quite enough time to do that. So I'd like to pull out 3 chapters in particular that I think resonate with where we are today, this kind of crazy time as we are emerging or re-emerging from the pandemic, dealing with incredible social and economic strife, political upheaval. All of this is almost a perfect storm of time to navigate through. And I think as a CEO or any senior leader, having to not only manage your company, but manage your organization in the midst of this kind of swirling environment. So if you don't mind, let's just talk about 3. And the first one is chapter 3, about your constituent consciousness. And this one resonated with me as a senior leader. There's just not enough hours in the day to meet all of the various stakeholders who want time with you, who want their agenda put forward. So many CEOs underestimate the amount of time, as we were talking earlier about Mayor Menino and you having a dinner out in a restaurant in the North End, and people just stopping by and wanting to talk to him. So how do you manage your time and make sure that you are staying in touch and supporting the needs of all these constituents?
Well, the first is to be prepared and aware that this will happen. I mean, one of the first things I talked to lots of leaders before writing this book, or as part of writing this book, to say, what do you wish you had known when you started that you now know? And this was one of the things they said was most important, is that you get the leader role, and immediately you're just shocked by the sheer number of constituencies and people who insist they must talk to you. And one CEO told me, I arrived with a plan for my first month. It was gone in the first day. Because I suddenly had 40 people who insisted on talking to me that day, and it just was impossible to find my way through this, and I was overwhelmed. And I think, therefore, so 1, be aware. 2, you have to triage. You have to realize that not everybody is as critically important as they certainly believe themselves to be, as hard as that is to do. And so you have to think about who can be said to, look, we can wait on that, things that are more important, but the triage is important because you can't, as you just said, possibly address everybody appropriately. The other is you also have to delegate. And the delegation isn't just being able to say, look, I'm going to push you off. It's because to say to people, look, that's an incredibly great question. I'm not prepared to answer that. I don't know. I'm a new leader. Let me find the person who knows. So that's a delegation that actually is a positive delegation as opposed to I'm pushing you off and being insulted. I'm saying, no. I'm actually showing you my vulnerability because I don't know. Let me go find somebody who does know and let them follow you up. I mean, that's a wonderful way to delegate without appearing to be arrogant as a new leader. And then one of the really practical suggestions I'd have for folks is if you're a leader of some large organization, have a good chief of staff. Have a chief lieutenant that you can turn to and say, look, I need you to help me organize all this, because if I do all of this, I won't be able to do what I came here to do, which was largely lead an organization. So help me organize. And so these are just some of the many practical suggestions that I try and put forward in the book because they are important, because otherwise you won't have time. And if you don't have time in your first step, when you're first stepping into a leadership role, you're in trouble.
Yeah, exactly. And I love your comment about delegating. And of course, how people want to have access to the person at the top, and what you have to you have to spread that importance or that availability to other people, because you can't.
But if I say to somebody, look, I really don't know, but Deb Wallace is the absolute expert on this topic. So if you talk to her, so two things happen, which I do, by the way, all the time with Baker Library. One is I show my vulnerability. I show a bit of humility because it's easy, because I don't know. And two, I empower you. Right. And now the constituent who's asking says, oh, well, that was a very thoughtful interaction. Thank you. I mean, and it's as simple as that, but that's a different mindset that a leader has to have than somebody who's a BU leader who says, I have to have the answer to every question.
Right. Well, sort of the flip of that in chapter 5, you talk about avoid being isolated. So it's not, here you are in demand, and now here you are, it's lonely at the top. So how do you recommend people stay connected in a productive way, especially with this speed and intensity? This rate of change is really tough. And what Mike Beard did talk about in his previous books at Baker's studio session with us is that you have to have open and honest conversations to really know what's going on.
Oh, clearly. Well, I think the first thing, this was one of the ones that really surprised me the most when I spent time with leaders, which was, I said, again, we're being reflective, what did you wish you had known that you now know? They said, first of all, it is remarkable how lonely I felt. And I was like, well, how can that be? You're surrounded by people on a constant basis. And he said, well, many would say, she would say, look, I'm surrounded by lots of people, but I don't have people I can really talk to about the issues that I'm feeling. I can be open, candid, and personable with, and be vulnerable. I feel like I have to always be on, and I have to play the role of a leader. And so I don't really have a kitchen cabinet, somebody who I can get the truth from. So I think the first is to recognize that is not the right reaction to feeling alone. The first reaction should be, hey, get off, as I like to say, get off your pedestal, get off the leader role, go out, walk around, engage people. We were speaking about before the session about Mayor Menino. There's nobody in the world who did a better job of engaging with his constituencies than did he. Yeah. A lesson learned from that, to get out, meet people, spend time with. There are many examples in the book about CEOs who actually are conscious about their ability to get out, go and talk to people at all levels to learn. Just one small vignette. A CEO told me that one of the things he always did was when he went out on sales calls was always to spend time with the salespeople alone in their car, being driven to the customer or the procurement agency, and say, look at how things going, what's working for you, what's not working. I mean, just because you hear so many things different than you will from the more senior people. And then your point about Michael's book, which is really important, which is you have to tell people that I want open and transparent conversation and truly mean it. Many leaders will say that, but the first time it actually happens, they'll be resentful, they'll push back, they'll be defensive. Of course, that just shuts down future conversation. So you have to be opening and engaging with it and wishing it to happen. And then, of course, it's so hard to do this. Like anything else, you have to avoid stepping back, having stepped forward.
Yeah. Well, just getting out there and being with people, especially after this time of being mostly on Zoom or, and I just wonder if we're going to have a resurgence of the walk around conversations or the water coolers, just get out and see people.
Well, and I think that this make an important point here is that for any leader who's actually been enrolled for some period of time, the pandemic and the post-pandemic period is a time for a reset. You can actually, mentally make a demarcation point and say, going forward, we're going to do things differently. And it's a wonderful opportunity that you don't want to miss.
The other chapter, incredibly poignant, especially we're recording this session on the first anniversary of George Floyd's murder. And you are right up front talk about in chapter 11 that we have to embrace the value and the reality of diversity, and that we have to approach diversity strategically and holistically, with a long-term view, not just a short-term, and not at a transactional, but at a deep commitment level. So would you talk to us about what you learned in observing so many great CEOs and senior leaders?
Yeah, and I would think the point you just made is the most important one for leaders going forward. Those who are really championing in a thoughtful and meaningful way the things that we all now think are incredibly important, reinforced by the anniversary, which are really good to remember, is those who take a long view and who say, look, this is a sea change that has to happen because we have to change our mindsets about what is, how to embrace the value of diversity and inclusion, not because it's a numeric goal, but because it is fundamentally part of human nature to see the value and the strength in that. Obviously, at the Harvard classrooms, we see that every day. As a teacher, I get to see the value of that diversity. Leaders also have to see the value of that diversity. The second, in terms of the short-termism that always is rampant, I'm fearful to say in most management teams about this topic is there's, for example, the belief that if we hire the head of diversity and inclusion, that terrific. It's just great that you're doing that, but that's the start, not the finish line. That is all that is doing is an enabler to help you have the conversations that now have to happen. Too often management see that as the ending point. The other is that it's all about building cohorts. And there's many at the school who have studied this in great detail. And I don't mean to in any way simplify their research because I cannot, but there's great research here. But one of the research findings is clearly that this is not an individual by individual basis. We have to create cohorts of people who can feel as if they're working with colleagues that they know, respect, and understand them. So how to build cohorts is important as part of this diversity effort. And finally, don't get trapped into the numbers. I was with a management team recently, and they were saying, we really value diversity. We have an objective to do it. But the truth is we can't meet our objective because we don't turn over that many people, so we don't hire enough people to actually make the change happen that you want us to make. And they're excusing why they weren't going to meet their targets. And I found that to be a very flawed conversation because it's all about the numbers. It isn't about the belief system. And they're just, they're all being driven by the numerics rather than by the value that comes with diversity.
Right. So, a question popped in my mind that related to that is we're seeing more and more organizations, corporations, as well as in the not-for-profit sector that are really coming out with a business and society conversation. So the 110 group, for example, that's signing on and making very explicit a commitment. So this is a real changing role for the CEO, isn't it, to be making social comment?
Oh, yeah. I mean, the simple answer is it used to be people and profit. Now it's people, profit, and planet. So, and I stole that from the Huber board that I'm on, which is a family company board, that everything they do is for people, profit, and planet. And now the planet part is the new part. And it's incredibly important because planet here is not just the whole issue about, inclusion of all peoples and all underrepresented backgrounds, but also the climate change and other sustainability questions that now are also at the fore in this conversation. So it's really a fuller understanding of what it means to be in the people dimension, as well as what it means to be in the planet dimension. And the profit has always been there, but now we have to do it within the context of these two other P's.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, I was thinking about is the book itself. So, and I have to find the right spot on here so that we can see the book.
Trying to hold it up. Thank you.
Is that, it is not just a fabulous guide. It is a tactile, approachable artifact, like as the book. And I'm just wondering, like how much planning, I'm assuming there was some planning that went into this, because it's a different size, it's a different font. It is the paper quality is different than we see in many other books. So can you tell us a little bit about, there's so much wonderful content, but as a package, it's a really interesting artifact.
Well, thank you for raising it, because it was, again, it's a voyage of discovery for me. I've written 2 other books, but they were never of this type. And one was a biography of my father, which was more of a personal effort on my part. So this is the first time really working with a publisher to have this conversation. And the conversation was, how do you see the book being used? How do you want to emphasize the book, not only in terms of the content, but also its touch and feel? Yeah. And I really wanted it to be viewed as something that one would slip into their backpack or their carry-ons and have a chance to really engage with it, not to have it sit on a bookshelf as much as a showy item, but more be in use. So that was one of the things that we spoke about with the publisher. And so their choice of the paper and the font size was in that same spirit. As for the cover, I find this only fun to talk about because one of the things you get as an author is you get alternative cover styles sent to you. And I had 4 of them sent to me, and I did not know how to choose, but I have a 23-year-old daughter who's a graduate of with a studio art degree, and I took it to her, and she was the one who decided. She said, "Dad, it's easy, it's this one." And that's how that choice was made. So
I love it. It is like looking underneath that piece of paper to see what. Yeah. So the packaging, we often talk about just the content, but it's that design, the form and function is just so important. But
well, and it was again, I can only take credit for the concept of the ideas, how to execute. Again, another good lesson learned is let others who are specialists do their jobs. Yeah. And so I certainly was the benefit of having others who knew this well to think about it.
It did remind me of those field guides. Remember, we used to take them out birding or whatever, that it is just that right size that you could stick in your carry-on. I like that idea. We're all ready to get back traveling. So
yes, we are ready to do that, and hopefully there will be that opportunity, and so people can use it. And I try to keep it quite terse and punchy, and not a lot of flowery. Lots of So that's also why it's at a length that is not too challenging for folks to get through.
Right, but it's very conversational. Like the way you draw people into the conversation is a wonderful skill too.
Yeah, well, I tend to think that the best way to learn is through case example. Obviously, why I'm at Harvard, but also in my own consulting experience, it's always easy to illustrate with an example rather than a lecture. And certainly, I've tried to show that in the book.
Yeah. Well, that's what we're wondering is there a sequel? I mean, given all that you have seen in these last 30 plus years and now your time working with both the MBA and the executive education programs here, have you seen it all? Or is this is just a constant renewal of learning? And if so, is there a sequel? Can we look forward to the next books at Baker with you?
Well, you're kind of asked. First of all, is undoubtedly a huge opportunity for me to learn from many others as I've come to Harvard. One of the reasons I came to join the faculty was to be able to continue my own learning, and that certainly has happened without a doubt. So there are many things I could be collaborating with other faculty on. But I am in the process of writing another book. This one will be based on mergers and acquisitions, and specifically the how-to in the reality of these transactions to get right. Because the last 15 years of my career was largely knitting together companies of some size. And so I really wanted the opportunity to come back and talk about the reality of what it really means to do mergers well. Because there are many, many merger books, and many of them tend to have a sense of recipe to them. You add A and B together and then C will result. And that's just not the reality of the world. And I want to try and bring some clarity to that conversation. So I'll be looking to do that hopefully in the next few months.
Well, hold a spot for us, and we'll pick you up on that one when that one comes out as well. But I was also thinking about how important this book is, and I was reading the Harvest article. I mean, you've gotten a lot of interesting conversations started about this book, and there was the Harvest, which is the school's the student newspaper, and when they asked you about this a surprise in the book, you said something about how little homework a CEO had done before they took the role. So then looking back. And so I would suggest with this book, there should be no excuse that they won't have done their homework. So hopefully you can erase that surprise in the future. I can't thank you enough for talking to us about the book. Is there one last nugget that you'd like to leave us with?
No, I'll just pick up on the theme you just left with, which is that I think it's really important that when you take on any leadership role, be it a CEO role or a not-for-profit role or even a professional service role, just to recognize that this role is unlike any that you'll ever have played. So it's worth stepping back and saying, rather than just barreling in and saying, I'm ready to go here with a little bit of hubris, it's better to step back, be reflective, try and think about what the skills are that you're going to need now versus what you've used to get to the job that you now have.
Well, thank you again, David. I also want to thank the team that brings the books at Baker together, Mariah Tumbleson-Shaw and Dina Girdman here from Baker Library. And Matt Ridley was our media consultant in the background, keeping things rolling. So as you well know, as a CEO or senior manager, it's not all about you, it's about the team that makes it all work. So thank you again for joining us, David. We've put some information up about your research page. People can have a look at the working knowledge article and also the faculty page here at HBS. David's work is fantastic as both a teacher and a researcher. We can't thank you enough for sharing your wisdom with us, which maybe, I guess from experience would be the bitterest, but perhaps due to Confucius, let's pull it together and say it's bittersweet, because you've certainly had an incredible career.
Well, thank you again for doing this, and thank you to everybody who made it possible.
Great. Okay, we'll wait for the sequel. Take care. Bye now.